Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Women's Health Unwrapped. I'm joined today by a lovely guest who is going to explore something that I think is relevant to every single one of us because we all feel emotions, and especially in our midlife stage, we can feel lots of emotions and perhaps some very great big swings of emotions. And emotional health is something that really does come into the mix of how we build strong overall health and wellness, especially as we navigate the changes midlife and menopause bring with us. So I'm joined by Hayley Wheeler, who is an emotional transformation expert, and she's going to unwrap what that means and also help me explore why your emotions play such a big part in strong health, especially our strong mental health, and how you can start to build some habits to better support your emotional and mental well-being. So welcome to the podcast, Hayley.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. So you and I chatted just recently when we first met, and we talked a lot about this kind of topic. And I actually was chatting to you about being a guest on your podcast. And as you shared what you did, I was like, that's such a brilliant topic for us to explore because our emotions do lead to so many of the actions that we take, and therefore the reality that our life is. And as I've just introduced, our emotions play an even bigger part when we have those hormonal swings of perimenopause, or maybe in your usual menstrual cycle as well. So yeah, I think this is relevant for everyone. But just to get us started, I'd love to know from you at the moment, what would you say your most impactful healthy habit is?
Oh, now then. So one of the things I've been really exploring recently is around prevention, integration, and proaction. And not just for the people I work with, but for me as well. And I think it's something that, particularly with health and mental health and well-being, we tend not to do it. We tend to wait until there's a crisis or something happens that is too much to ignore before we take action. So I'm really, even my own sort of stuff, I'm looking at what can I do to prevent, to integrate into my life and my children's lives, and then to take any action should I notice any cracks appearing in my kind of well-being.
Yeah, I love that. And that is what I'm all about, is prevention rather than reaction. And when I deliver corporate training sessions, I use a slide with an image of a woman in the kitchen putting out a fire. And on the other side, on the same slide, is a picture of a female pilot in a plane. And I use the analogy of, being that CEO, that pilot, the captain of your life, your AKA the plane in that image, rather than waiting for the fire to put the
Mm.
flames out, which when it comes to health, so many of us do, don't we? Because we think, well, we're getting by, we're all right, let's just wait. But as you say, we shouldn't wait for something to be broken when it comes to our health. So is there anything you've identified that you need support on and then started to build a habit, especially as we're at the start of 2025?
Well, yeah. So one of the things I've done, so the reason why I do the work that I do is because I had depression, and my aim is to never go back there again. So something that I do on an ongoing basis every single day, even if I don't physically do anything or even emotionally per se, I do a lot of mental reflection. I sit and I want to understand what's going on around me. And that is something that people don't tend to do unless something is going wrong. We reflect on, work, we reflect on our businesses, we reflect on maybe our parenting, but we don't necessarily reflect on our own performance personally. And I think it's a real missing key thing for people to do. And yet we're not doing that.
Yeah, I agree. We've just caught up in that spin cycle of life. And I think we've almost glorified that go, 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 do, be busy, busy, busy kind of way of living, haven't we? And we're seeing that come out in the stats around burnout, stress, depression, other mental health illnesses, anxiety being a huge one in midlife. So maybe that leads us nicely into starting to get into your story, Hayley, and what happened to you that's led you to now be an expert in emotional health, because you mentioned just there depression. So yeah, I'd love for you to share what happened to you and where it led to where you are right now.
Yeah, so where I'm at now, and I say this all the time, is that I've learned that I am the most important person in my world. And I say this to people all the time, and people don't actually get it. But the reason why I say that is because while I was not on my own priority list, while I was trying to make other people happy, I was trying to make sure that the children had everything they needed from me, that we were making memories, that everything was going okay for everybody else. I was really struggling. And, 8 years I struggled with depression, and I didn't really recognize it as depression because in the early stages, it was more about getting up in the morning and my days were just getting a little bit harder. So tasks were just a little bit harder. Maybe I was a little bit more tired. But there wasn't a massive indicator that depression was a problem. That went on for a couple of years. Then in 2012, so it started in 2010. So bearing in mind, prior to that, I'd had 2 bouts of postnatal depression in 2004 and 2006, the 2 middle children. I didn't have it on my first and my last. But then in 2010, this is when life started to get hard. And then in 2012, so actually between 2010 and 2012, learning became a coping mechanism for me. So at the time, life was getting harder. My days were getting more of an emotional struggle. And I just was wanting to get to bed. I would get to the point where I'd get up in the morning, I just needed to go to bed. I was only sleeping 2 to 4 hours a night,
Wow.
but I still needed to get to bed. So my days consisted of going to work. So I had a full-time job, 4 children. On a Monday, I was doing one course. On a Tuesday, I was doing my teaching. On a Wednesday, I had a different course going. On the Thursday, I had another course. On a Friday, I would be editing my book. And then on the Saturday and Sunday would depend on what work I had left from the other things through the week. I would then be finishing off whatever task. So I literally, learning was keeping me going. For 2 years, I did that on top of a full-time job. And that, again, still wasn't a real indicator that I was struggling with depression, because what do people tell you depression looks like? Sitting on the sofa, cuddled in a blanket, not being able to go in the bath, not being able to shower. That wasn't me. I slapped my makeup on, I did my hair, I washed every morning, I had a bath or a shower every morning, I dressed well, I stuck a smile on my face, and nobody knew. So even my family didn't know, not one person. I think the kids knew there was something different, but nobody really knew. And I remember my friend saying to me, we were on the phone when she said, "What are you doing now?" So I was explaining. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm telling the girls we used to work with how much you're doing and how amazing you're doing." And I was thinking, it sounds amazing from the outside, but from the inside, I'm literally drowning. I'm literally struggling to get through my days, even though I was achieving all of these things. Then in 2012, I was learned out. I wasn't necessarily burnt. I was learned. I could not learn anymore. And I left my job because I was being bullied in work as well. And I was working for a domestic violence charity, which is a lot harder to swallow, I think, sometimes, than an organisation. I didn't really realise. I thought at the time I was just really upset because I was bullied by she was my friend and my manager. So when I left, it wasn't really an indicator again that this might be depression. And I kind of just went on with life getting harder and harder as the years went by. And then in 2015, I hit my first rock bottom in the July of 2015. And I thought, this is it now. This is life forever. There's no way out. I couldn't see a way out. But at the same time, I realised that my son, who was 11 then, my second son, had been born with anxiety. I had this huge download of, oh my gosh, I know why he is the way that he is, why he is different. We'd had a life or death birth with him. It was a cesarean, really. We were both our lives were at risk. But nobody told us, like, he's 20 now, nobody talked about birth trauma back then. And he became my motivation and my motivator. So in the October, when I hit my second rock bottom, and it was this thought, it was devastating. And I knew then I had to do something. So my 2 choices were leave my children and my family, or do something about it. So I chose to fight. I was very lucky. I met a lady who does some grief work. I met a homeopath who kind of kick-started my journey. And I was not friends with emotions. I did not like emotions. I thought they were a weakness. That's my kind of history with emotions. But very quickly realised how powerful emotions are. And I had to do something to release all those emotions that were stuck. And I actually now I love emotions now. It's they are my friend. I get to harness them. I get to use them. And that journey, I can hand on heart say I'm glad I had depression. I would never go back there, but it has made me who I am now, and that's why Emotion Mind Dynamic exists. That's why my son is this year 9 years anxiety free. That's why I can say I'll never go back into depression, because I have all the skills, the knowledge, the experience now to be able to look after myself and do it well. And this is why my kind of thing to everybody is, you are the most important person in your world, because nobody stepped up to parent my children, to run my business, to do anything like I would have done.
Oh, yeah. So many things I want to pull out there. I think just on that last point you've made, Hayley, I focus on working with professional women. So those who are either in corporate type careers or running their own business, who, enjoy their career and their career means a lot to them. They really want to achieve something, whatever that looks like for them, whether it's money or status or, the fulfillment of the job itself. But women who really want their career to be a part of their life, not their full life, but are perhaps caught up in that cycle of it being their full life, and knowing that that isn't right. Because if something does happen to them, like in your story where your health is negatively impacted, then you're not going to have a business to run. You won't have the income necessarily. Even if you're an employee, sick pay usually, even if you've got a great package, doesn't last indefinitely. And that puts a lot of pressure on top of what is already a difficult situation. So yeah, you being the most important thing in your life is something we need to step into. And I help women to realize. I talk about realizing, your worth. And that's something we don't get taught as women, and also don't get shown and told that it's okay. I think for many of us, especially our generation and older, talking about yourself, like how you started with, I am the most important thing in my life, would have been seen as big-headed and a bit showy and pretentious and so on. But we have to move away from that, don't we? So that's one thing. And then you mentioned about emotions and how you didn't like emotion. And I also think many of us, not just women, have been taught that showing emotion is a sign of weakness, that it's not a good thing, and certainly not showing emotion in public or sharing that. Like you said, you didn't tell people, even your family didn't know. And yeah, like that's something I would just want to start exploring a little bit, but maybe start with, like, how would you describe emotion, like literally, to a 6-year-old, for example? What's that 101 of what an emotion is?
It's just that reaction to something, to a situation, that your physical reaction, your how you express yourself when it comes to a situation. So whether it's going out with your friends, it's a happiness, isn't it? Is that, and I think children will explain them better than I can probably, because I do work with children as well, and they love emotions. When they get to grips with them and they get to understand them, they love it. But as adults, do we understand emotions? And I didn't. So being able to understand that this is just an expression of the situation or the experience you've just had, it doesn't make you like or dislike them. It just
Mm-hmm.
makes it a fact. And I think we need to make emotions a fact more so in our lives than we are now. Emotions now, as you said, society will, one of the things we talk about is, let's say there's a breakup, society will very quickly tell you when to stop talking about that and when to stop expressing your emotions. So we're very much guided by, am I allowed to be sad anymore? Oh no, society says no, then I can't anymore. And I think we, in learning that lesson from childhood, this, you said it earlier, this get up and do it and just keep going, that's become a badge of honour for people. You know, I did a talk this morning and they were saying the same thing. We have this badge of honour. I just get up and do it. That's not really, yes, it's a good thing in that you can get things done. But if you just keep getting up and doing it and leaving those emotions fill your emotional vessel, that's not such a good thing.
Yeah, and I think in midlife, when our emotions, for many of us, are changing, perhaps uncontrollably due to the hormonal fluctuations we're experiencing, I think it can be very difficult to know it's okay to express that and to give yourself a lot of, kind of I don't negative talk, and maybe even punishing yourself, like, well, why did I lose my temper? Which, anger and frustration and volatility is a big one that many women seem to experience in menopause. We can belittle ourselves a lot, and I think when we think about our mothers and grandmothers, they didn't talk about the menopause and what they were experiencing, because it was that, shoulders back, I'm a woman, this is just part of life, get on with it, you don't moan, you don't share it, you just keep it to yourself and keep going. And we've inherited that through seeing that in our, female caregivers and role models. And so we feel the same, but I think we're in a very different world. As you said, 4 children, a full-time job, learning to try to develop yourself and maybe also, put a plaster on some of the struggles you actually were experiencing. But that busy life, and having those emotions but thinking it's wrong to express them, is like literally a disaster waiting to happen, so to speak, isn't it? Because it isn't healthy, and the world we live in now is very much, or has a lot of different types of stress to what our older, family members experience. We just have this full on 24/7 world built around technology, don't we? So that's got a big part to play, I'm sure.
Yeah, I one of the things you said there, we talk about emotional expression. So the process that for me was the final kind of handshake with an emotion, maybe, was the releasing. So even though society doesn't allow us to express emotions, so we may process them. We may recognize that we are unhappy, offended, sad, disappointed. We won't express that because society says, no, we don't want to hear that. We certainly do not release them. So even though we're doing that first part of the processing piece where I recognize it, I know what I'm feeling, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, we're not doing the rest. We're not getting the opportunity to process and express, because we don't want to upset other people. We don't want to be the one responsible for other people's emotions, so we keep them in. Yet we are upset. It's okay for us to be upset. But that releasing piece, that's where the power is. And that's the piece that very often doesn't happen through therapy or coaching on their own. It's very much, we talk around emotions in these environments. We don't release them. And I see a lot of people who have been through some kind of therapy, some of them 4, 5 or 6 different kinds of therapies, and still stuck with emotions because they've processed them, expressed them, but not released them.
So let's start with, if you are recognizing the emotions, which is a move on for many of us, if we are aware of what we're feeling and we're recognizing it and maybe doing some reflection on it, even if that's just independently, not through counselling or therapy, like, what's then the outcome of not releasing them? If we are at least reflecting them, like, how can those emotions affect our overall well-being and especially our mental health?
Yeah, great question, because people don't want to know what the answer is to this because we want to keep ignoring them. What tends to happen, so I work with the emotional vessel. I have a lovely teal jar that we use to understand it. So every time you go through something that you don't express or process or release, you squish it into your emotional vessel. When that gets about half full, we're usually at managed stage. So we're managing the symptoms at halfway roughly. That means people will be needing to do things like go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week, 6 or 7 times a week, doing yoga 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week, go running, swimming. So they're doing the healthy behaviours or healthy exercising. However, they need to do them to feel a sense of control, a bit of relief, or to just clear their mind. The problem at this stage is that while you're managing, if you are injured and you can't run, or you can't swim, or you can't do the yoga, you have no coping mechanism. So now you are being overwhelmed by the emotions that would usually be dealt with, or I'm going to say brushed under the carpet by doing all those activities, because that's the problem at managing stage. We're still brushing them under the carpet. Then if you go another layer up again, you get to the point where you have to cope. And coping becomes a different level again. So coping is more about chaotic implementation of anything that will manage the emotion for now. So when I do the behaviour analysis, we look at behaviours that they use to cope. So there's 7 categories of behaviours, but there's a good, I would say now, about 150 to 160 behaviours on there. And we highlight all the behaviours they're using to cope. And then I play a little game with it. We count them all up and then I average them out over a 12-hour period. The most we've had is somebody with 100 and roughly, I think it was about 108 or more behaviours, and we worked it out. Every 10 minutes they're having to implement something to cope.
And what, give us an example? Is that like picking your phone up, scrolling social media, eating something? Like what would
Yeah,
that look like?
there's things like volcano moments. So do you know those moments where something happens, something small, and you blow at the children or your partner or maybe somebody in work? Quite often it's not in work, but it does happen. It is picking your phone up and scrolling, investing in anything that'll distract you. So it was whether it is social media, video games, films, binge watching things, eating. There's lots of different behaviours, those categories. There's passive aggressive behaviours, there's emotional harm behaviours, there's physical harm behaviours. So there's lots of different behaviours that we implement in order to get to the next stage. And it might just be that every 10 minutes you need something. Now, I'm saying that we just average it out over 12 hours. I'm not saying that they do everything every hour of every day, but that's a lot of things to be needing to do. Again, hear that word, needing to do.
Needing, yeah.
And when you need to do something, it's very different, particularly at the managing stage where you choose to go to the gym 7 times a week. So different. The reason why you're going to the gym is different. The reason why, children do things, don't they? And we do blow sometimes. But if you need to blow on a regular basis because that allows you to release everything, that's not a good place to be.
And I just want to ask, on the managed stage, is the behaviour always the exercise, or could that be something else? Because I'm thinking from my experience of people who have been in that place where that emotional vessel is probably at the managed stage, but they're not exercising as intensely as what you described. So could there be other behaviours similar to
Yeah.
what you have at the cope stage, but just like you say, it's not that you're at that needing point there and you're choosing to do them, but they are having a benefit by doing them?
Well, I think that the other behaviours would be things like drinking an extra glass of wine a night. Or now
Yes.
instead of drinking Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're now drinking Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And if it's a need, it becomes unhealthy regardless of what it is. So it might be eating. So you might find that you're eating more, you're binge eating more, you're eating the wrong foods, and controlling food is another option. So not just overeating, but controlling what you eat. So it could be really focused on extremely healthy diet, but it's a need driving it, not a choice. And that's such a distinction that people don't really understand. And I've had clients say to me, yeah, but I love the gym. Well, I'm not really saying you don't. What I'm saying is, if you need to go, it's become unhealthy because that's your coping mechanism. And if you take that coping mechanism away, what happens? And when they start to think like that, they start to realize, okay, so it's not that the gym is unhealthy. The driver to go to the gym, that's the unhealthy piece.
Yeah, I think I get that, and I'm associating this with me and the fact that I would say I need to exercise to move my body. Like movement for me is my core habit, and it definitely helps me to have strong overall health and well-being. But if I took that away, I wouldn't then be in that emotional crisis point, as you say. It's that I want to do it and I need to do it because it's become a part of who I am, and I know the value of doing that. But I'm not leaning on that to release emotions that I'm pushing down, brushing under the carpet, trying to just ignore and cope with. Is that the right perception and understanding of it?
Yeah, so I would just change you're choosing to do it. So it's
I'm
not that it's a
choosing,
need
yeah.
to say, I want to do it, I'm choosing to do it. And if I choose
Right.
not to do it today, it means that I'm not going to get overwhelmed because I'm just choosing not to do it. And I think when we start to understand that it's a slight difference, isn't it? Need and
Yeah.
choice, but actually it's really powerful. Like what
Mm.
I'm hearing from you is, I love doing it. It's good for my body benefits. Great. And if I don't do it today and I don't do it for the next 3 days, I'm fine. But somebody who the driving force is, I need to because my head is going to explode if I don't, or I need to because whatever that is, whether it's the gym or something else, that's the issue. Because what happens if it's taken away? And then when you start to realize that, and it's hard to explain to somebody who does genuinely love the gym, but is driven by need. I'm not saying you should never go to the gym again. Please don't think that. I'm not saying it's not a healthy thing to do. But if you can understand what's driving you to go, and there's I'm going to say a need to change that to make it a choice, then that's going to be the emotional expression and release piece.
Yeah, okay. I think that makes sense. And I've definitely heard some female fitness influencers talk about in the past how they were in that kind of place of needing to go because of unresolved emotion, trauma, things that were going on. And then now they're in a different place where they perhaps aesthetically don't look as strong or what we would deem as women healthy, because we have that formed belief of what health is when it comes to how we look. But they know they are much more healthy now. They still work out, they care about their nutrition and so on, but they aren't in that place, as you described, where they've needed to go because they had so much else in the mix that was not in their awareness, conscious mind, being pushed aside. So if we then move on to releasing, I know obviously you can't explain it all because this is part of your emotion mind dynamic. You've got that 6-step process and you've written a book all about this and so on. But yeah, what would release look like, just to get again to set that up and give us a high level explanation of it?
Yeah, this is the important piece. So a lot of the work that I do is all about you understanding you. So if you kind of put this into context, it feels like quite a small piece of the jigsaw puzzle because there is so much. But what we've got a habit of doing is not identifying honestly the emotions we're feeling with somebody. So this is about saying to somebody or saying to yourself, that thing that my parents did when I was a child. So let's say it's divorcing, okay? My parents divorcing was the right thing for them. But for me, I was absolutely heartbroken when my dad moved out of my house. My mum then was really stressed, and it had an impact on our relationship. So that changed for me, and that made me sad as well. People don't do it for fear of feeling like they judge somebody. I don't want to judge my mum because my mum was a good mum and my dad was a good dad. So what we do then is we kind of brush over those emotions. We're not emotionally honest with ourselves. So when you start becoming emotionally honest and allowing yourself, giving yourself that permission to be emotionally honest and to feel those emotions, you start to go, right, I was really, really upset. It upset me for years. We look at the long-term impact as well, and that's another part of the jigsaw. But then what they have to do is really understand the kind of the roots of those emotions, and then we literally let them go. We as part of the final letter, we let those emotions go. And it's funny because what people tend to do, they either have they have this immediate I can breathe again, or it's a slow burn where there's a process where the body is and the mind is letting go of those emotions over time, and then they find 3 weeks down the road, oh, actually, I've actually not had an anxiety attack, or I've been really happy over the last 3 weeks. I've not shouted at the children or anything like that. But it's that physically, emotionally, and mentally letting go.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so you touched there on that example from when someone was a child. Obviously, we're feeling emotions every day. That's how we work as humans. Well, I don't know if you know, start off the top of your head how many emotions we must feel a day, but there must be literally tens of thousands a day. Whether it's the way someone's driving, or the way we feel when we eat, or in listening to this, like you constantly have emotions going on, don't you? And they're making you respond in a certain way and so on. So we're feeling the emotion now, but is a lot of the struggles we have based on our childhood experiences and those stored emotions from especially the early years when we are developing and our brains being programmed.
A lot of it is about emotional memories. So if you think about so when I do the coaching model with people, we look at the emotions they're feeling in the moment. So what's this situation? What emotions are you feeling? Now, even happy emotions and positive emotions and negative emotions tend to be emotional memories. So we've learnt them along the way, but because we haven't released them, we've also stored them. And if we think about every situation triggers some kind of emotional memory, then we're not just experiencing it in the here now, we're reinforcing that feeling. So whether it's happiness or sadness or anger, we're reinforcing that so it grows. So the more, obviously, the happier we are, the more we do things that make us happy and make us love and gratitude and all those things, we're reinforcing those. But the same is true of negative emotions as well. So if we are angry, if our pattern of relationships may have made us angry, sad, every time we're in a situation that's very similar to a past situation, we're re-feeling, reinforcing, and to some extent growing that emotion. We're nurturing it. So it takes up more space in your emotional vessel. So you have this compounding effect of guilt and shame are probably the two most powerful. But you have things like frustration is powerful, anger is powerful. And when you felt that for 30 years without releasing or processing or expressing, it started like a little snowball. And now we have a big, huge, I don't know, igloo size, One of the questions, like this is a bit of a fun thing I do. I will ask people, if your emotional vessel, so I have a little tiny jar I use as an emotional vessel, but if your emotional vessel was a vehicle, so you could think about a bike, or let's go really small, a skateboard, a scooter, a bike, a mini, an 8-seater car, a minibus, and we go up to, and I've had people like, we've gone from those to train, to aeroplane, we have gone really big double-decker bus, and that's the kind of thing people are carrying around them. So even though emotions don't have a physical weight, imagine dragging, if someone said, oh, mine is like a double-decker bus, imagine dragging that around with you every day in emotions.
Oh, I love that. That really helps to put perspective against it. And I've mentioned this on a podcast, I can't remember which one it was recently, about the Disney film Inside Out, and the one that came out most recently, the second one. And I can just see those balls in my mind. Have you seen it,
I've
Hayley?
seen the first one, not the second
But
one.
Yeah, so I think the second one is a complete lesson in how our brain and mind works for what you're talking about here, those emotions. It goes much deeper into the emotions and how those core memories are stored and why they're stored. And as you said, those memories are there. And then when something similar happens, and this is linked to what I do as habits and helping people to understand the power of habits, that is stored like a file. I've always used this old fashioned metal filing cabinet system, you know, what we used to have back in the day. You pull the big drawer out, you've got all of those hanging files. And that's what is stored in our mind. And so those memories are there. That's what creates the habits, you know, the automatic action response that you take, and your memories, that it's all linked, isn't it? And so those balls are there, that some of them are stored as core memories. And so then, like you said, shame, if that keeps coming up, then you're building and building and building on when that first came in to you as a human and formed as that core memory. And so I think, yeah, if anyone hasn't seen the Inside Out films, I would say to watch them, because they are a very easily to digest like lesson in all of this. Obviously they're made for kids, but there is that very um, intellectual adult lesson in them, as well as the entertainment side. So yeah, I love all of this. I find it so fascinating. And I think, you know, when we chatted, we brought in trauma, because for many of us, those emotions are attached to trauma, aren't they? Whether it's the big trauma, as you said, it could be a parental divorce, it could be an accident, it could be some kind of abuse, you know, things we do typically think of when we think of trauma. But it could also be something like the bullying. You mentioned workplace bullying, but as a child, it could be something at school, or it could be a comment from a family member that you can't even actually remember, but it's created this emotional memory, and therefore that response that you have, you know, again, without realizing. So a lot of those emotions are linked to these different types of trauma and just normal life experience, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we're led to believe that trauma comes from big things.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to focus on the emotional impact of things. So as we go through the program, to get to the point where you release the emotions, we've looked at what's the emotional impact immediately, but what's the long-term emotional impact. Now, we don't just talk about things like frustration, anger, sadness. We also talk about self-esteem, self-worth, and we look at the behaviors, the beliefs, your values, and how all of those things have been impacted, which then create, as you've talked about habits, then create these patterns that eventually become the norm. You know, one of the things I've said in the past in posts is, if you let it happen, it becomes a pattern. So if you don't recognize that on the third unhealthy relationship, that's your pattern, because you search for an unhealthy relationship because that's become your comfort zone. That's your familiar and predictable place to be. You know, a lot of us find comfort in discomfort, believe it or not, and I think we've got to learn to move away from that. But those emotions, they have a massive impact on how you view yourself, how you think, or what you think you deserve in your life, and how you make choices and how you relate to people. So when people talk about emotions being this soft, tiny skill, you look at the impact that we've spoken about today, and what potentially could happen if you don't deal with them. And there are millions of us not dealing with our emotions at the
Mm.
moment in the world. Billions, probably.
Yeah, and as you know, having 4 children and the experience you've had with your son, many of us, again, as parents, think the right thing to do when our kids are upset, when they're angry, is to stop the emotion. You know, like they fall over the cry. It's like, you're all right, stop crying, come on, it's not that bad, rather than let them release the emotion. The same, you know, when they're angry because they can't have the toy off the shelf in the toy shop, again, you know, we try to cull that anger immediately, telling them it's wrong to feel anger, where, as you said, all of the emotions are fine to feel. It's then what happens from that emotion, the action, the behavior that you proceed to take, that is actually potentially the problem. Is, you know, that.
Mm.
And when we're teaching our children not to fail, and I hear lots about that being such a big problem in that tech world we live in, that online world where kids aren't really like realizing emotions that are coming through because of how much time they're spending on the screen and how little interaction they have with other kids or even adults. They're just there in their room or sitting on two screens at the same time because that's what they do at that age, isn't it?
Yes. And
Mm.
I think we're very much more, or at least I hear people saying that Gen Z are talking more about their emotions. I'm not convinced because they are not learning how to communicate human to human as much as we did going out to play and doing things like that. So I think they might be talking about them. I just don't think there's much understanding behind when they talk about mental health. And that's a big concern for me. You look at us. I am only friends with emotions now because I had depression, and I forced myself to do the self-development work and the emotional work as opposed to going down the medical model or the therapeutic model. But children now, we need to transfer those skills that we're learning. If we're not learning them, we can't transfer them to them, but they're living in a different world. The social media world is so unemotional. I know my son, he's 15. He's on games that I don't particularly agree with, that are killing people all the time. There's blood spurting out, or there's this, or there's that, or there's all these things, and there's complete unemotional attachment to it. There's nothing. And they're having a laugh that, his friends are the other side of Swansea. And I worry about that because we are so unemotional. And I suppose us in our generation, we were told, feel your emotions, they're a weakness, put them aside, just get up and get on with it. Now they're not even being told that. They don't need to be told it because they're not experiencing the emotions in the same way.
Yeah, I agree, and this could be a whole other episode. I think it's kind of been normalized, as you say, to talk about having poor mental health, but I don't think they really understand what poor mental health is, and especially the word anxiety. I've spoke about this several times because of my history with anxiety as well, and I've mentioned this when I've been a guest on other podcasts and said, I don't disbelieve that there are many young people experiencing anxiety. But what concerns me is how flippantly it's referred to and used as a way of feeling. My daughter took her GCSE exams last year, and that anxious word. Fortunately, she wasn't a kid who really experienced that, but I think it came up, a couple of times, but amongst her friends, and trying to help them see it's normal to be anxious and what anxiety is. It's
Yeah,
when anxiety becomes chronic and it is detrimental to how you go about your life, the same way that sadness is okay, but sadness that means you can't live a normal life like you experience with depression isn't okay. And so it's trying to differentiate it. And so as you say, I think, yeah, there's maybe an assumption that they are more open, certainly, I think, when it comes to certain topics and beliefs, the Gen Z. But at the same time, I think there is a real lack of depth behind it, especially when it comes to emotions and health. And what I loved about you and wanting to connect with you is that we are very aligned in that we have to role model this. As you said, if we don't understand this and develop ourselves, we aren't going to help our kids to have these skills, and they are actually going to need them way more than what we need them, and we need them for sure, don't we? So we'll have to change that and be more comfortable. And I think, just to kind of circle back to menopause, we're talking about that a lot more, and again, that combined with overall health and well-being needs to be a normal conversation that we're having with our young people in our lives, because we need them to know it's okay to want to make things better, to take control of your habits and lifestyle, to improve your health, not to wait for something to go wrong and then react. And how a lot of us react is through the typical healthcare medical system, isn't it? Let's get a diagnosis, let's have a, I'm not saying it has to be a pill, but prescription to fix the problem, and then I'll be okay.
yeah, it's a tough place, isn't it?
Mm,
Because it's not an So the work that I do, I was going to say it's an easy fix, but I want to dive into that a little bit. When you've got the skills for anything, so whether it's your job, it's relationships, it's your emotional health, your mental health, your physical health, when you have the skills and the resources internally, you can deal with anything quite easily. The issue we have is nobody's developing those skills. I often think, what if in the playground, what if as a child in our family, we'd have allowed emotions to be spoken about in the community, people were allowed to be sad and people were allowed to be angry. And there is an element of that in I grew up in a very small village. But generally, there is a cut-off point. But imagine growing up where those emotions are freely expressed and processed and released. We wouldn't be getting into a point in our adulthood where we're having to learn that stuff now and unlearn all the things that we have learned. And if we can pass that on to our children, and I say this a bit tongue in cheek, but it is reality. These children now are going to be our carers when we're in a home. And I want them to be happy. I want them to be well so that they can do that well. So it's a little bit selfish, but a little bit tongue in cheek. But they deserve to, if we're learning all these things now, they deserve to have those skills from us. And I tell you, when I work with children, they get it far quicker than the adults do. They have a desire and a thirst to understand themselves more so than adults because they haven't been through as many tough stuff as adults. So they have an ability to change very quickly and adapt and become quite emotional. But if they're not doing that at home longer term, they go back into the old patterns and those old habits are picked up again. So we need a big shift in society when it comes to emotions because they're not a weakness. In fact, you think about big, strong rugby players on the pitch. When they are motivated to go and tackle somebody, what's behind the motivation is the emotion. And yet they talk about the motivation and the physical stuff. They never talk about the emotional drivers.
Yeah, and motivation comes from emotion, doesn't it? The work I do with my clients always starts with why they want something. We don't start with what's wrong. We start with what's that vision for your life? Where would you like to be in 5 years or 10 years or 30 years time, and why? And really getting into the emotion of it, because it's that emotion that creates the motivation to actually make the change you want. You can tell yourself all you want, I must eat healthier, I must exercise, I must put the phone down earlier on a night, I must stress less, I must be kinder to the husband or whatever it might be. But unless you've got the emotion behind it to understand why that matters to you, then that's just going to continuously be a goal you're failing against. That's why habits don't form, because you haven't got that emotion behind it. And if you're listening and thinking about this in your own life, think about something you've really wanted that has come to fruition, and I'll bet there is so much emotion behind it. And for many women listening, you're potentially a mother, you may have become a mother through pregnancy or a different form, but think about when you chose or made that decision to choose to become a parent and have a child. You made it happen because you had that emotion behind really, really wanting that and knowing why you wanted that. And so, yeah, I think tapping into that is so important. And something I was thinking about when you were talking in that last point, Hayley, was, when we think about death in this country and culture, we hate death. We are very uncomfortable, and there's so much emotion attached to that. If you saw someone in the street who has recently lost a loved one, you're probably thinking on approach, well, what do I say? Do I mention that person? Do I reference it, or do I just pretend everything's rosy and fine today? We get really uncomfortable with those extreme emotional situations, especially. And just kind of, I'm just aware we'll start wrapping up, and I'd love to get some suggestions from you on how someone might be able to work on this themselves as a starting point. But I wanted to talk about this because of what we spoke about Hayley, was that in midlife, when our hormones do start to change and we have things happening in our brain, like what we do in puberty, our brain is remodeling itself. Those emotions that we have stored in the jar and or the vessel, and as you said, maybe that vessel, I was thinking it could be one of those great big cruise ships, those luxury cruise ships, that are humongous. If you are carrying the weight of that emotion around with you, and then things start to change, and we know our brain can create, legitimate physiological mental changes, then you are literally waiting to crumble. And so being more in control of this is just really important, I think, for that reason, but also because at this point of our life, we are looking at potentially less than the second half of our life ahead of us. And so it's now or never, really. I think it's a perfect time to take control, do some of this work, and feel much healthier and stronger as you embark on that second part of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that people don't really think about is I think we started the conversation, didn't we? That people just let things happen and hit crisis point instead of preempting and planning and putting things into place. We wait until we're at that point. Well, now is the time. Even if you're feeling really well, now is the time to be practicing these skills. If you are struggling, now is the time to be practicing these skills. We'll always have a reason not to. We will always find some reason, excuse, not to practice it, because it's not easy. And I just think we've got to learn and really force ourselves to keep going with it, because if we wait until something breaks or something falls apart or something happens and we are forced to do something about it, we're not always going to do the right thing then. Now you get a chance to do the right thing for yourself now and keep working at it.
And I've shared some of this with my perimenopause journey, in that I've had quite a lot of different symptoms come about, but because I've got the tools, and one of those tools is the self-awareness, which is the starting point for all of this, I am able to then help myself so that I don't reach that point where I've got this burning fire that becomes really hard to put out. I'm in control. We're all going to have challenging life situations, events, real, obstacles come our way. None of us have what I would describe as an easy life. That's not what the human experience is about, is it? But if we are in control, and as you say, we've embedded those tools that they've become habits, then it is much easier to navigate them. Your resilience is going to really help carry you through. So on that note, then, for someone who is thinking, yeah, this can only bring positive things, this is great stuff to bring into my life, especially if they may be in that turbulent stage of emotional swings, what would be 3 simple steps you would suggest someone can take to start to build some of these skills to manage their emotions?
Yeah, so this is a technique that I've been using with my clients for a long time, and I didn't really think of it as a technique. I just thought it was something we did. But we kind of start with this. So when I meet clients for the first time, we go through the emotional vessel, and there's always a situation that they feel very out of control. So if there are situations where you feel out of control, this is a really good tool to allow you to take the space, to create the space to make a decision as to how you behave. So it's called the emotional step back technique. And it's quite hard when things are a challenge, when there's chaos going on and your emotions are all over the place and brain fog and all those things that you're experiencing, as we often do, along with all the parenting stuff and the partner stuff and all those things that we have to do. This is something that I think we're going to start with the kind of the pre-steps, really. So let's say there's a situation that's really frustrating and your emotions are wanting you to react to the situation, right? So we are going to stop the reacting. We're going to look at ways we can respond. So the first thing to do is stop. Just pause for now. Take a huge deep breath. And if you need to, take a physical step back. Right? So you are moving your body as well as putting a stop to it, because instead of diving in with the emotional reaction, we're going to take control. Stop, breathe, take that quick step back. Watch, observe what's going on. Observe what other people are doing. What are you doing? What are you feeling? What's going on for you? What's going on in the wider situation? Because again, we want to react to that thing because that's the thing that's bothering me. That person said something. But when you look at the wider picture, quite often you've got a lot going on for you. You have things that are bothering you. Maybe you have had anxiety today, or something's happened this morning that hasn't cleared from your mind, or you need to sort that out later and it's stressing you out. And when you look at it like that, that thing that person said really wasn't the problem. So if you were to just dive in and emotionally react, you're going to overreact, or you're going to do it in a way that doesn't really feel beneficial to anybody. Then you're just going to make a decision. Do I need to respond, or how do I want to respond? Because now you've given yourself the space to decide, look at the wider picture. Do I need to respond? Maybe not. Maybe what they've said has just caught you on a bad moment because you're stressed already. Maybe you need to take time out. And that response is, can you give me 20 minutes, or can you give me till tomorrow? Can you give me half an hour? I just need to go away and think about it. Or, do you know what? I really didn't appreciate what you said there. I'm not falling out with you, but I really don't feel like you respected me there. Have your say. But by taking that physical step back and stopping, observing everything, you get to decide how you respond, or if you need to respond. And that's giving you back control in situations, really emotionally heavy situations.
Oh, that's so powerful. I'm going to give an example where I think I've just done this week, and I definitely don't do this for everything. And I've had a few emotional outbursts over the past few months, more than what I've had in the last couple of years. But this week I was completing my self-assessment for the Inland Revenue, which of course I'd left until right towards the end of January and deadline. And I thought it's going to be really simple. I'll go on, do it. And anyway, then I had a few issues logging on and got through it quite quick, but then it didn't submit. It said that something was wrong with either the login or this reference. And my default emotion in things like this, because of how I was brought up, is anger, is to feel the impatience and frustration and respond with anger. And I actually felt that emotion coming. So I managed to kind of pause. And I loved what you said about that physical step back. I think that can send a real message to your brain. I think I just kind of paused and was like, oh, hang on, Nicola, you have a choice here. As you said, there's a choice. Look at the situation, what's going on. You've only been doing it really for about 20 minutes, and actually you're probably very close to just getting it submitted. So don't respond in the way you usually would. And that was the choice I could then make, was, should I just get angry because this is taking longer and now I don't know how to fix it, and I had paperwork all over the floor looking for a new number? Or shall I just stay in control and remain calm and think, yeah, I'm going to get this done? And so I chose to do that. So I think that's hopefully a good example for someone where it doesn't involve anyone else, because we feel emotion when we're on our own. As we said earlier, emotion is happening constantly. So I think, so just to summarize, it's kind of that stop, pause. The look was the second point, isn't it? So to kind of take in what's going on, maybe have some nuance around it. And then the third one is choose.
Yes.
Okay, how am I going to respond? Do I need to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you
Brilliant.
the power back. If you let them, emotions take your power. Let's reframe that. You give your emotions the power. Whereas something like this is a simple technique, and it can be done. Practice it with your family. Practice it with them. Just tonight, or the next time you're in with your family or people in work, just observe. Just unemotionally, just observe what's going on. No judgment, no criticism, just observing. How are they interacting with one another? How am I interacting with the situation? What am I bringing to the situation? No self-punishment, just observing. It's so powerful, because then, as you said, you get a chance to decide on what happens next, what the outcome is from your actions next.
Yeah.
It's simple, easy to implement, and really powerful.
And the good news with this is the more you do it, the more this will become your default. Like you will create those new habits. The more you choose, say in my case, to not respond with anger, I'm creating that new loop in my brain to respond in that way rather than what's been there since childhood with anger. And so rather than, or squashing that anger down as maybe I would do it at some points, is letting it come, but then, as you said, releasing it to replace it with something else that I'm choosing, and so that is going to become the default. Is that how it works? Like how you take people forward in the programs you work with
Yeah,
them
it's
in?
really
Yeah.
interesting because quite often they do this with relationships. Relationships come up a lot because
I
when
bet.
things aren't good for us, our relationships are not good. So it's generally they will say things like, "Oh, my partner or my children," and when they go away and they do that, sometimes they don't even need to feel the emotion. So it's not even about releasing the emotion. As you said there, you didn't really need to feel the anger. It was just an automatic default. So that's again another powerful thing. And sometimes they've come back and they've gone, I don't even need to respond anymore. I don't even need to get involved in the situation. And that is, again, I'm choosing here. I'm taking control back, particularly if anxiety is really overwhelming you. I'm taking control because I'm not getting involved in that situation. Whereas maybe a week ago, I was involved. The children would start shouting, I would start shouting, and they would start shouting more. And now it's, do what you like. I'm not getting involved. You can argue amongst yourselves. I'm going to go cook the tea. And it's lovely. It's a great place to be.
Yeah, I've just finished listening to Mel Robbins' new book, The Let Them Theory, and I think this links a lot to that premise of, and it's not that you're throwing the towel in and going, oh, let them do whatever they want, especially when it comes to kids. But yeah, it's instead you're choosing me. It's like, okay, let them do that, let that happen, whatever it might be, but let me be in control of what I do and therefore what I feel, rather than just trying to dismiss it and move on, or maybe push and give that response and then just get caught up in the whole web of whatever that creates.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pop everything for Hayley into the notes if you want to find out more. But just to let us know, Hayley, where's the best place to connect? And you have a book as well. So if somebody does want to get into this more, you've got a podcast also. So share a little bit about where we can connect and find out more about the work you do.
Yeah, you can find me anywhere on Hayley T Wheeler. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. I've got a website. The book at the moment, so the initial book was not about emotion mind dynamics. So I'm going into second version of a book now. So that's been a real challenge because the first one came within 2 weeks. I wrote the first one in
Wow.
2 weeks by accident. It was supposed to be a trifold leaflet. But you will find me on all platforms and just come and say hi. Just from this, that you've heard the podcast, come and say hi and connect with me on all social media platforms, because I just think the more connections we have and the more we're learning off each other, the better the world will be.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, for our children, or if they're not your kids, that younger generation that we want to all support and make the world a better place with. But Hayley does work in corporates as well. So if you do work in a corporate organisation, maybe have a listen, check out more of what she does, and see whether this is something your workplace would be interesting. Because I think this is just such a fascinating thing to bring into a team and all of those dynamics that go on with different personality types as well. And I've personally told Hayley that she needs to get this into schools, get it into the education system, because we do, as you shared, really need young people to know more about how their mind works, what they're feeling, why they think certain things, how to respond, and just to be better humans that aren't going to be impacted by what we are seeing, now with those huge rising anxiety levels and stress and suicide. Sadly, the numbers are really scary in young people. So we definitely know this is such an important area to protect mental health for the future generations.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, I've loved the conversation. And if you are if you listen to this in one go, well done. We're over an hour, so I really appreciate your time. But hopefully you've taken a lot from it, from Hayley's personal story, but also now what she can offer to help you get in control and work on some of those emotions. So thank you so much, Hayley.
No, thank you. It's been fab. And we could talk for hours. We said that, didn't we? We could go for about 3 hours, but we won't do that to you. But thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you.